The Jag E-Type. Gotta love them. With its well-proportioned body, sleek, sexy curves. It is an absolutely gorgeous car. And that big six that's in there, they just sound so good. And the driving experience behind the wheel had to have been truly a revelation when this car was released to the public. But when it comes time to lift this beautiful bonnet up out of the way and actually work on it, it's easy to not love them so well anymore. But for the first place, you got to put something up underneath the front of the car here, because when you lift it up, the bonnet, the bottom of it can actually touch the ground. So in order for you not to scratch anything, you got to have something up underneath there. And then the next thing is getting the car up off the ground to actually work on it. So now you would think, being a shop with a 2-post lift installed, it'd be quite simple to get this thing up in the air. But you'd be wrong. So when these things were new, they provide a little jacking point, which is right there, a little socket to put the jack in to lift it up to change those tires. But there's not a whole lot of Jag owners who are willing to bet that after 50 years, that will still support a jack. Because if it doesn't support it, you get a lot of damage really quickly. And in a car like this, with really an unknown history, because the owner has only had it less than a year, probably a few months, whatever it was, we don't know what's behind this paint. So on modern cars, on either side, you would just put one pad there and one pad there underneath that pinch weld seam there. But this isn't a modern car. It's not necessarily made to be lifted that way. And even on the modern cars, I've seen these crush up in on something even, it was only even 10, 12 years old because of rust taking hold up inside there. Now, Jaguar owners pretty much universally don't even think about doing this. And there's no way I would do that on any customer cars. So up under here on the rear, you got a mount right here, where a lot of people will just put the pads right there and use that to lift. Well, that's okay, except that you have to support the rear suspension too when you lift it up, because the bushings that hold the rear cage in oftentimes aren't strong enough to actually hold it, and you can cause damage to them. So you don't want to just let it hang. Plus, this is a Series 2 car. Now, Series 3 cars have a box section going across here that this front pad can go under for the torsion bar. That makes for a decent lifting spot. But there's really nothing under Series 1 and Series 2 cars to lift it from, other than going to this suspension joint here, which there's a heat shield that wraps around that, so you really shouldn't use that unless you have really long arms to get to the front one, and I don't. Now, you can go out there on the forums and you can find good ways of holding these things on a lift, but they usually involved some pretty elaborately made pieces of wood and some extra support stands and stuff like that. So, now I hadn't had one of these things in the shop for quite a few years now, and I had to struggle to remember how I did it. And I remember that I never actually used the lift when I was working on these. So jacking these things up with a floor jack, or a trolley jack as the English would say, they present their own problems as well. So what I have here is your standard 2.5 ton, 3 ton range jack. And you get underneath here, see that exhaust system? Doesn't quite fit, does it? So you need like a low profile jack to get underneath there. And you've got to have a block of wood to go up in there to get down below the exhaust system to be able to jack it on that center plate on the rear suspension. So getting the car up on a few bits of wood here like this can really help you get the jack underneath of it. But I always like to actually jack up the front end of any car first. So let's move up there. So there's not exactly a whole lot easily visible here for you to jack on. And you absolutely do not want to use this in any way, shape, or form. That's the brace that holds the radiator. If you try jacking on that, you will bend it and your day could get expensive pretty quickly. But behind that, up underneath here, there is, for lack of a better term, a cross member. They call it a picture frame. I'll show you from the top side. So this structure here, it goes down and across and creates a square frame they call a picture frame. You want to jack on the bottom of that. But even that's not quite so straightforward in itself, because the way it's made, it's kind of got a U shape with ears hanging out the bottom, and if you just jack it up, you'll bend those ears, which this one's already been bent, but you need to get a block of wood underneath there to support that and jack off the wood. So it is generally accepted that you can put the jack stands right here at these pivot points. And you can see here's the bottom of the picture frame that I was telling you about. You can see where people had jacked it up here and bends his flanges over. Now it's preferable to actually take a piece of wood and shape it so that it fits up inside there with a couple slots or just a step to support that. But in order to do that, you got to straighten all that first. So I ended up actually just using a flat piece on this one. So on the rear, we can just support it right there. Now, I'm leaving the jack underneath of it and keeping some of the weight on the jack. Because, like I said before, you don't want the rear suspension just hanging on its cage, because the upper bushings may or may not be able to handle it. So as you can see, the care and handling of one of these big cats is a little bit more involved than most of our other little British cars, which is part of the reason why these things are so expensive to work on. Aside from the fact that the way they're built, a lot of things take a lot of hours to do. Like, you want to replace the rear calipers or the rear rotors? The whole rear suspension has to come completely out of the car, which means the exhaust system has to get dropped off and everything to do that. You want to replace the clutch hose? Well, it's buried in way at the top underneath the intake manifold, so it's really hard to get to with the intake manifold in place. Yay, fun.